The scream cut through the air. "Let go of the millionaire's son now!" Within seconds, chaos took over the mansion, and the father, upon seeing what was happening, completely lost control. If you like emotional stories, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. Continuing, Marina Adams never imagined that Tuesday in March would change her life forever. It was almost 3 in the afternoon when she was on her knees on the main living room floor, scrubbing the Italian marble that reflected the golden sunlight of London. The mansion in Belgravia was immense, 3 floors of luxury and silence, a silence that always made her uncomfortable. She was 27, with brown hair tied in a practical ponytail, her hands calloused from so much work. She woke up every day at 5 in the morning in the Brixton community, took 2 buses and a tube to get there. She supported her mother, Mrs. Nora, who suffered from arthritis and could barely walk, and her younger sister, Jessica, 16, who dreamed of finishing high school. Marina worked as a cleaner in 4 different houses during the week. But the Vance family's house was special, not just because of its size or the slightly better salary they paid. It was because of the boy, Michael, a 5-year-old with huge brown eyes and a smile that rarely appeared. That day, as she wiped the floor for the 3rd time, Marina heard a sound that made her blood run cold, a scream. It wasn't a scream of a tantrum or play. It was a scream of pain, of fear. It came from the 2nd floor, from Michael's room. She dropped the cloth on the floor, not thinking twice. She ran up the stairs, holding onto her jeans to avoid tripping. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like it would explode. When she reached the 2nd floor corridor, she heard Susan, the nanny's hoarse voice. "Stop whining, you spoiled boy. Do you think you'll get everything by crying? That doesn't work with me." Marina pushed the children's room door so hard that the doorknob hit the wall, and what she saw made her tremble from head to toe. Susan, a woman in her early 40s, corpulent and with a harsh expression, held Michael's thin arm so tightly that her fingers looked like claws. The boy cried desperately, trying to break free, but she shook him angrily, making his head sway back and forth. "You're going to learn to behave, understand?" Marina didn't think. She didn't calculate the consequences. She just screamed with all the strength in her lungs, "Let go of Mr. Robert's son now." The silence that followed was deafening. Susan turned, startled, her eyes wide, but she didn't let go of the boy. That's when Marina advanced. She pushed the nanny firmly, moving her away from Michael, and took the boy in her arms. The little one was trembling, sobbing, clinging to her neck as if she were the only solid thing in the world. "What do you think you're doing?" Susan regained her composure, her voice returning to that authoritarian tone Marina had heard before. "You're nothing but a daily cleaner. I'm the nanny hired by the family. Who do you think you are to challenge me?" Marina took a deep breath, feeling Michael's weight in her arms, feeling his little heart beating fast against hers. She looked down at the boy's arms and saw purple marks, several, in different stages of healing, some more recent, others already yellowish. "My God," Marina whispered, feeling tears burn her eyes. "They're marks from a naughty child," Susan said, crossing her arms. "He falls, he bumps into things, he's careless. Boys are just like that." "Those aren't marks from falling," Marina said, and her voice came out firmer than she expected. "Those are hand marks, finger marks, from someone who hurts on purpose." Susan took a step forward, threateningly. "You'll regret this. I'll talk to Mrs. Patricia. You'll lose this job and all the others. No one will want a cleaner who invents lies." Marina felt the fear. She really did. Losing that job meant not being able to pay the rent, not being able to buy her mother's medicine, seeing Jessica have to drop out of school. But when she looked down and saw Michael hiding his face in her shoulder, still trembling, she knew what she had to do. "You can fire me," Marina said, surprising herself with her own courage. "But before that, his father will know everything." She took her phone out of her pocket with her free hand, that simple device she had bought second-hand 2 years ago. With trembling fingers, she took photos of Michael's arms. The boy didn't resist. He seemed relieved that someone was finally seeing, finally paying attention. Susan tried to grab the phone, but Marina was quicker. She left the room with Michael in her arms, went down the stairs and locked herself in the downstairs bathroom. There, with her hands still trembling, she looked for the contact Mr. Robert had given her months ago, for any house-related emergency. She had never used it. She had never thought it would be worthy of bothering him. He was Robert Vance, owner of Vance Developments, one of London's largest construction companies. A man always in an impeccable suit, always with a furrowed brow looking at his phone, always too busy to notice his son. But now there was no choice. Marina pressed the send button and sent the photos, along with a simple message. "Mr. Robert, please come home now. It's about Michael. It's urgent." Robert Vance was in a meeting on the 12th floor of his office in Canary Wharf when his phone vibrated. He glanced at it, ready to ignore, but something in the message made him stop. It was Marina, the cleaner. She had never contacted him before, and she was talking about Michael. He opened the photos and the world stopped. His son's arms, purple, marked, bruised. Robert rose from the leather chair so quickly that he knocked his coffee cup onto the table. The executives in the room fell silent, looking at him. "The meeting's over," he said, his voice strange, distant. "Now." He didn't wait for a response. He grabbed his jacket, his briefcase, and ran for the elevator. In the car he drove like a madman, running amber lights, honking, cursing London traffic. His mind was a whirlwind. How had he not seen? How had he let this happen? In recent months, since the divorce from Patricia, everything had been chaos. She had kept the house in Kensington. He had bought that mansion in Belgravia. Michael spent the week with him and weekends with his mother. It was Patricia who had insisted on hiring Susan. "She's firm, Robert," Patricia had said in that cold, calculating tone he knew so well. "Michael needs boundaries. You don't know how to raise a child. You just give him everything he wants. He's becoming spoiled, weak. Susan was recommended by my therapist. She worked with important families. She'll teach discipline." Robert had accepted because he was too exhausted to argue, because he thought Patricia, with her degree in pedagogy, knew more about raising children than he did, because he was consumed by guilt for ending the marriage and wanted to compensate Michael somehow. But now, looking at those photos at the red light, he hated himself. How could he have been so blind? He arrived home in 40 minutes, a record. He left the Mercedes parked anywhere in the garage and ran through the front door. Marina was sitting on the living room sofa, with Michael on her lap. The boy had stopped crying, but his eyes were red and swollen. Susan stood beside them, arms crossed, with an expression of someone ready to defend herself. Robert stopped at the entrance to the living room. He was 36, tall, broad-shouldered, always exuding authority. But at that moment, looking at his son, he felt small, helpless, destroyed. "Michael," he said, his voice hoarse. "Come here, son." Michael hesitated. He looked at Marina as if asking permission. She nodded gently, and only then did the boy get off her lap and walk slowly to his father. Robert knelt on the floor, getting down to his son's level. "Show me your arms," he asked. Michael extended his thin arms. Robert held them carefully, as if they were made of crystal. And he saw up close what the photos had already shown. Purple, finger marks, some older marks, others recent. His son had been hurt, repeatedly, and he hadn't noticed. "Who did this to you?" Robert asked, but he already knew the answer. Michael looked at the floor, silent. Robert felt his throat tighten. His son was afraid to speak. He was afraid of being punished for telling the truth. It was then that Marina stood up. She was pale, her hands still trembling, but there was a determination in her eyes that Robert had never seen before. "Mr. Robert," she began, "I saw it." She was shaking him, shouting at him, squeezing his arm hard. It wasn't the first time. "The marks, they're old. This has been happening for a while." Robert slowly turned to Susan. The nanny had lost some of her composure, but she still tried to maintain her facade. "Mr. Robert, I can explain," she began. "Marina is exaggerating. Michael is a difficult child. He needs firmness. Mrs. Patricia hired me specifically for that. She said you were too soft, that the boy needed a firm hand." "Firm hand?" Robert repeated, and his voice was dangerously low. "You call this a firm hand?" He stood up, still holding Michael's hand, and at that moment, all the pieces fell into place. The nights Michael cried and said he had nightmares. The mornings he refused breakfast, saying he had a stomachache. The times he asked, "Dad, when is Aunt Susan leaving?" Robert had attributed everything to the divorce, to the trauma of separation. But that wasn't it. It was fear. Fear of the person who should protect him. "You're fired," Robert said. "Get your things and leave my house now." Susan opened her mouth to protest, but Robert raised his hand. "No, I don't want to hear anything else. You hurt my son. You're leaving now or I'm calling the police. The nanny hesitated, seeming to weigh her options. Finally, realizing she had lost, she went upstairs to get her things. Robert pulled out his phone and called his lawyer. Richard, I need you to come here now and bring someone specializing in family law. I'm filing for full custody of Michael, today. When he hung up, he looked at Marina. She was still standing, looking lost, as if she didn't know whether to stay or leave. Marina, Robert said, and there was something in his voice she had never heard. Gratitude, respect. You saved my son. You had the courage to do what I should have done a long time ago. Thank you. Marina felt the tears finally fall. All the fear, all the tension of the last few hours collapsed at once. I didn't know if I should interfere, sir. But I couldn't just stand by and watch. You did the right thing, Robert said. And then, in a decision he made at that exact moment, he added, and I'm going to need your help. Can you testify about what you saw for the custody case? Marina swallowed hard. Testifying against a wealthy family, against a woman like Patricia Vance, meant putting a target on her back. But when she looked down and saw Michael, still clinging to his father's hand, she knew there was no other choice. Yes, she said, I'll testify. And there in that luxurious living room with the afternoon sun streaming through the French windows, 3 lives changed forever. None of them yet knew the price they would pay for that moment of courage, nor did they know that this was just the beginning of a journey that would test all their limits, that would reveal who they truly were when everything was at stake. But for now, in that fragile and tense instant, there was only one certainty. A scream had echoed, a scream that would not be forgotten. A scream that would change everything. The news spread fast, too fast. Patricia Vance had many flaws, but inefficiency was not one of them. The same night Robert fired Susan and filed for custody, she already knew everything. And she was furious. It was almost 9 in the evening when Marina's phone rang. She was home, sitting in the small kitchen of her Brixton shack, still processing everything that had happened. Mrs. Nora watched her worriedly but asked no questions. She knew her daughter well enough to know she would tell her when she was ready. The number was unknown. Marina hesitated before answering. Hello? So it's you. The voice on the other end was icy, calculated. The little cleaner who thinks she can destroy a family. Marina recognized the voice immediately. Patricia Vance. She had seen Mr. Robert's ex-wife a few times, always from a distance, always impeccable in her expensive suits and perfectly brushed blonde hair. A woman who seemed sculpted from marble, cold and untouchable. Mrs. Patricia, Shut up, Patricia cut her off, and there was venom in every word. You're not going to talk. You're going to listen. I know what you did. I know you convinced my ex-husband that Susan was mistreating Michael. I know you took photos. That you invented a dramatic story to get attention. I didn't invent anything, Marina said, feeling anger rise in her chest. I saw it with my own eyes. She was hurting Michael. Michael is a sensitive, dramatic child. He's always been like that, spoiled by his father, too protected. Susan was just setting boundaries, something that man never knew how to do. Boundaries don't leave purple marks on a child's arms, Marina retorted. There was a silence on the other end. When Patricia spoke again, her voice was even colder, more dangerous. You made a mistake, Marina. A very big mistake. You meddled in matters that are none of your business. And now you're going to pay for it. Is that a threat? It's a promise, Patricia said. You think you can testify against me, that you can side with Robert and think there will be no consequences? You're a cleaner, Marina. A woman with no formal education, no resources, no protection. I know all the families in the area. All of them. And by tomorrow morning, none of them will want you working in their homes. Marina's heart pounded. She worked for 4 families besides the Vances. These were the jobs that paid the rent, the food, her mother's medicine. Without them, how would she survive? You can't do that, Marina whispered, but even she knew how naive that sounded. I can and I will, Patricia replied. And that's not all. I'll spread the word to every domestic employment agency in London that you're problematic, that you invent stories, that you're unreliable. You'll find out how hard it is to get work when no one wants to hire you. The call ended. Marina stood there holding her phone, feeling her hands tremble. Mrs. Nora got up from her chair with difficulty and came over to her. What's wrong, daughter? Who was that? Marina told her everything. From the moment she heard Michael's scream to the call she had just received. When she finished, there were tears in her eyes, but also anger. Anger at a system that protected the rich and crushed the poor. Anger at a woman who used her power to destroy anyone who dared to challenge her. You did the right thing, Marina, Mrs. Nora said, holding her daughter's face with her calloused hands. And no matter what happens, you keep doing the right thing. That woman can take your job, but she can't take your dignity. Marina nodded, trying to believe those words. But deep down, fear consumed her. How would she pay the bills? How would she support her family? The answer came faster than she expected. The next day, 3 of the 4 families Marina worked for called to cancel her services. The excuses varied, but the pattern was the same. We don't need you anymore, we found someone else, we're cutting costs. Marina knew the truth. Patricia had kept her promise. On Thursday, sitting in the kitchen with bills spread on the table, Marina did the calculations. With only one job left, she could pay the rent, but there would be nothing left for food or medicine. She would have to choose, and that was a choice no mother should have to make. It was Jessica who suggested it. I can drop out of school, sis. I can get a job, help out. Don't even think about it, Marina said immediately. You're going to finish high school. You're going to apply for university. You're going to have the life I didn't have. But how are we going to... Marina had no answer. Not yet. It was then that the phone rang again. It was Mr. Robert. Marina, we need to talk. Can you come to the house tomorrow morning? It's not for work, it's about something else. Marina agreed, not knowing what to expect. When she arrived the next morning, the house felt different, quieter somehow. Robert was waiting for her in the living room, dressed more casually without his usual suit. Michael was next to him, playing with building blocks on the rug. Marina, sit, Robert said, pointing to the sofa. There was something different in his eyes, a softness she hadn't seen before. She sat, her hands clasped in her lap, waiting. I know what Patricia did, Robert began. I know she called your other clients, that she made you lose your jobs. Marina felt her face flush with shame. She didn't want him to know. She didn't want to seem weak, needy. I'll find other jobs, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. No, you won't, Robert said, and there was no cruelty in his words, just realism. Patricia is very connected. She knows half of London's elite. She'll make sure you can't find work in any house in the area. Marina felt tears threaten to fall. It was all true. It was all real. And there was nothing she could do. But, Robert continued, I have a proposal. I want to hire you full-time, to take care of Michael, the house, everything. I'll pay you double what you earned from all your jobs combined. I'll offer health insurance for you and your family. And I'll pay a lawyer to protect you from any legal retaliation Patricia tries to make. Marina looked at him, speechless. It couldn't be true. No one did that. No one paid so much, protected so much for a simple cleaner. Why? Was all she could ask. Because you saved my son, Robert said, and there was emotion in his voice. Because you had courage when I was a coward. Because you did the right thing even knowing the price you would pay. And because... He looked at Michael, who had stopped playing and was looking at Marina with those big, sweet eyes. Because he likes you. And right now he needs someone to trust. Marina couldn't hold back the tears. They streamed down her face, hot. It was relief, it was gratitude, it was so many things mixed together that she couldn't even name them. I accept, she said. I accept, and I will do everything in my power to take good care of him. And so began a new phase. Marina started arriving every day at 7 in the morning and leaving at 7 in the evening. She took care of Michael, prepared meals, organized the house. But more than that, she became a constant, safe, reliable presence in the life of that frightened boy. At first, Michael was quiet, withdrawn. He avoided eye contact, whispered when he spoke, jumped at the slightest loud noise. Marina recognized those signs. She herself had been like that at 6, after her stepfather at the time used to hit her and her mother. She knew fear, she knew trauma. So she started slowly. She talked to him while cooking, told stories about her own childhood, about Brixton, about the children in the community. She didn't pressure him. She was just there, present, safe. It was Robert who suggested child therapy. I've booked an appointment with Dr. Helen Miller, he said one evening, after Michael had gone to sleep. Marina was cleaning the kitchen. She specializes in child trauma, but I was wondering if you could go along. For the first few sessions, at least, Michael seems more comfortable with you." Marina agreed. And so every Tuesday and Thursday, she took Michael to Dr. Helen's office in Marylebone. At first, the boy refused to go in. He clung to Marina's hand, trembling. But gradually, with patience and kindness, Dr. Helen managed to create a safe space. Marina watched the sessions from the waiting room, but the doctor always called her in for the last 15 minutes to talk. It was in one of these conversations that Helen said something that would change everything. "Marina, do you realize how important you are to this boy's recovery? He sees you as a maternal figure. And it's no wonder. You offer what he needs most right now. Security, consistency, genuine affection. But his mother, his biological mother," Helen corrected, "is a cold, controlling and emotionally absent person." From Michael's words, she always valued performance over affection, achievements over emotions. The boy grew up thinking he needed to be perfect to be loved. Marina felt her heart ache. What kind of mother does that to a child? It was in those weeks, in those sessions, in those conversations, that Marina began to understand the extent of the damage. Susan was not just an aggressive nanny. She was an extension of Patricia's control, a tool to mold Michael into the kind of child Patricia wanted: obedient, silent, perfect. And Robert was discovering the same thing. He began to remember small details he had ignored. How Patricia complained when Michael cried, how she said her son was weak, too sensitive, how she compared him to other children, always putting him down. "I was blind," Robert confessed one night to Marina. They were in the kitchen, he drinking whiskey, she preparing Michael's lunch for the next day. "I thought she was just demanding, that she wanted the best for him. But it wasn't that. She wanted to mold him, to transform him into a version of herself." Marina didn't know what to say. She just kept cutting fruit, listening. "Thank you," Robert said suddenly, "for being here, for taking care of him, for showing me how a father should be." It was at that moment, in that kitchen lit by the soft light of the lamp, that something changed between them. A tension that wasn't uncomfortable, but charged with possibilities. Marina felt it, and she knew he felt it too. But there were many barriers between them. The class difference, the recent trauma, the impending custody battle. It was not the time for confused feelings. It was time to protect Michael, and that was exactly what they would do. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later, and they both knew the war was just beginning. Patricia wouldn't give up without a fight. And when powerful people fight, those in the way usually get hurt. Marina wondered on the nights she returned to Brixton if she had enough strength to face what was coming. If her courage would be enough when she was in court, being interrogated, being attacked, being discredited. But then she thought of Michael. How he had started to smile again. How he had started to play again. How for the first time in months he slept through the night without nightmares. And she knew she would face everything. Because some battles aren't about you. They're about protecting those who can't protect themselves. And this was a battle she was willing to fight, no matter the cost. Westminster Magistrates' Court was a grey and imposing building, full of corridors that echoed hurried footsteps and whispered conversations. Marina had never been in a courtroom before. When she arrived that Monday in May, accompanied by Richard Allen, Robert's lawyer, her legs trembled so much that she had to stop on the staircase to take a deep breath. "It'll be all right," Richard said. He was a man in his 50s, grey-haired, impeccably suited and with a confidence Marina wished she had. "You just need to tell the truth. That's all we need." But Marina knew it wasn't that simple. The truth was never simple when it was on the opposite side of people with money and power. Robert was already inside, sitting in one of the front rows, looking paler than usual. When he saw Marina, he stood up and waved. She returned a weak smile. Michael wasn't there, thank goodness. Richard had managed to have the boy's testimony taken in a closed session, only with the judge and a psychologist. It had been a few days earlier, and Robert didn't want to go into details. But Marina saw in his eyes that it had been difficult. Across the room, separated by a corridor that seemed like the Grand Canyon, sat Patricia Vance. She wore a light pink, perfectly tailored suit, her blonde hair in soft waves on her shoulders. Beside her was her lawyer, Dr. Marcus Fisher, known for never losing a case, and beside him, to Marina's surprise and horror, was a man, Tall, handsome, in a navy blue suit, Patricia held his hand, displaying a smile that looked rehearsed in a mirror. "That's her new boyfriend," Richard whispered to Marina. "Dr. Edward Clark, a Crown prosecutor. She brought him to impress the judge." Marina felt her stomach churn. How could someone turn a hearing about a child's welfare into a theatrical performance? "All rise for His Honor, Judge Francis Albright." The judge entered, a man in his 60s, bald with thin-rimmed glasses and a severe expression. Marina had heard of him. Richard had warned her. Judge Albright was known for being skeptical of dramatic accusations, especially when they came from sources he considered less reliable. In other words, he doubted the poor who accused the rich. The hearing began. Patricia's lawyer was the first to speak, and he wasted no time in building his narrative. "Your Honor, we are here today because of an injustice. My client, Mrs. Patricia Vance, a respected woman, a qualified pedagogue, dedicated to the well-being of her only child, is being accused of negligence and of having allowed mistreatment." And what is the basis of this accusation? The testimony of a domestic cleaner who has clear personal interests in this case. Marina felt her blood boil. But Richard had warned her, "Don't react, don't show emotion. Let him do his job." "The truth, Your Honor," the lawyer continued, "is that the boy Michael is a sensitive child who had difficulty adapting to his parents' divorce. The hired nanny, Mrs. Susan Costa, was chosen by Mrs. Patricia specifically for her experience in establishing healthy routines and boundaries. The so-called marks that appear in the photos are the results of an active child who plays, falls, and gets hurt. It's natural." When it was Richard's turn, he started differently, more direct, more forceful. "Your Honor, I have here medical and psychological reports that completely contradict this fantastical narrative. The boy Michael Vance did not just have play marks. He had bruises in different stages of healing, finger marks on his arms, clear signs of repeated physical aggression. More than that, the psychological report shows a child with clear symptoms of post-traumatic stress. Recurrent nightmares, fear of authority figures, refusal to eat. These are not symptoms of adapting to divorce. They are symptoms of abuse." The room fell silent. Marina saw Patricia purse her lips, but her face remained impassive. The judge looked at the documents, frowned, and then said, "I would like to hear the witness. Mrs. Marina Adams, please approach." Marina stood up on shaky legs. She walked to the front, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. When she sat in the witness chair, all eyes were on her. But the only ones that mattered were Robert's, who looked at her with gratitude and concern. Richard asked the questions first. They were clear, direct questions. Marina recounted what she had seen: Susan shaking Michael, the marks on his arms, the screams, the fear in the child's eyes. Her voice trembled at times, but she kept her gaze firm. Then came Patricia's lawyer. And it was exactly as Richard had predicted: brutal. "Mrs. Adams, how long have you worked as a domestic cleaner?" "For 12 years. "And what is your educational background?" Marina felt the first pang of humiliation. Incomplete high school education. "Ah, so you have no training in pediatrics, psychology, or any area related to childcare, correct?" "I don't have a diploma, but I have experience," Marina replied, feeling anger rise. "Experience," the lawyer repeated with disdain. "Do you have children?" "No." "Then explain to me, Mrs. Adams, how someone without formal training, without children, feels qualified to judge the educational methods of a qualified pedagogue." Marina took a deep breath. She remembered Richard's words. "Don't be provoked, just tell the truth. I didn't need a diploma to know that a child shouldn't have purple finger marks on their arms. I didn't need training to see the terror in that boy's eyes when the nanny entered the room. And I didn't need to be a mother to know that what I saw was not education. It was violence." The lawyer smiled as if he expected exactly that answer. Violence. A strong word. "Tell me, Mrs. Adams, don't you find it convenient that these accusations appear precisely when Mr. Robert Vance, your employer, is in a custody dispute? Don't you find it interesting that, after allegedly being dismissed by the other families you worked for, you received a generous offer from Mr. Robert? Double salary, health insurance, legal protection." Marina felt the blow. This was it. This was exactly where he wanted to lead. "Are you implying that you invented this whole story to secure your job and perhaps something more?" "I didn't invent anything," Marina said, and her voice came out firm, clear. "And if you think someone would invent a story like this, risk their reputation, lose their other jobs, all for money. Then you don't understand anything about what it means to do the right thing. Objection. Your Honor, the lawyer said, looking offended. The witness is being hostile. Overruled, the judge said. And for the first time, Marina saw a slight smile on his lips. Continue, Mrs. Adams. Marina looked directly at Patricia then, and said, I took photos because I knew no one would believe me. I'm just a cleaner, uneducated, nameless, powerless. But those marks were real. That child's fear was real. And if I hadn't spoken up, if I had stayed silent for fear of losing my job, I would have to live the rest of my life knowing I let an innocent boy suffer. And I couldn't do that. There was a silence in the room. Even Patricia's lawyer seemed to lose his way for a moment. It was then that the judge asked to see Susan Costa. The former nanny was called, entering through the side door. She looked different, thinner, with deep dark circles under her eyes. When she swore to tell the truth, her hand trembled. The interrogation was quick. Susan tried to maintain the story that she was just firm, that she set boundaries. But when Richard showed the photos of the marks and asked if she thought that was normal, she hesitated. And in that hesitation, her entire defense collapsed. Then came the reports. The forensic medical examiner confirmed that the marks were consistent with aggression. The psychologist who had evaluated Michael described the symptoms of trauma. And finally, the video of Michael's testimony was shown. Marina was not prepared for that. To see the boy in that small room, sitting in a chair too big for him, telling in a trembling voice how Aunt Susan hit him, how she told him he was weak, how she locked him in his room when he cried. To see the tears streaming down his face as he said he was scared, that he didn't want to go back to his mother's house because Aunt Susan would be there. Marina felt her own tears fall. She looked at Robert and saw that he was crying too, not caring who saw. But the most devastating moment was when the psychologist in the video asked, Michael, do you feel safe at your father's house? And the boy with those huge eyes wet with tears replied, Now I do, because Aunt Marina is there. The judge turned off the video. He cleaned his glasses. He looked at Patricia, who for the first time seemed to have lost her composure. Her face was red, her eyes bright with contained fury. Do you have anything to say, Mrs. Patricia? The judge asked. Patricia stood up and made the mistake that would change everything. Your Honor, my son has always been dramatic. He exaggerates, he creates stories. Susan was merely a disciplinarian. At no point did I authorize any kind of violence, but I recognize that children need firm boundaries. If there was any excess, it was without my knowledge. But what I cannot accept is that a domestic cleaner, a person who barely has formal education, be elevated to the status of authority on how to raise my son. She has no qualifications. She is nobody. Absolute silence. And then Marina saw it. The judge had realized. It wasn't just about the marks, about the aggression. It was about control. Patricia couldn't accept that she had lost control of the narrative. And more than that, she couldn't accept that a simple cleaner had more empathy and humanity than she did. The judge pounded his gavel. I will retire to deliberate. Please await my return. The 15 minutes that followed were the longest of Marina's life. She sat next to Richard, her hands clasped, praying softly. Robert was right behind her, and she could feel the tension emanating from him. When the judge returned, his face was serious. After careful analysis of all elements presented, of the medical and psychological reports, and especially after the minor's testimony, I decide as follows. Full custody of the minor, Michael Vance, is granted to the father, Mr. Robert Vance. Mrs. Patricia Vance will have the right to supervised visits, to be carried out in a neutral location, until it is proven that the maternal environment is safe and suitable for the minor. Furthermore, I order the opening of an investigation against Mrs. Susan Costa for assault and child mistreatment. Should complicity or negligence on the part of Mrs. Patricia Vance be proven, additional legal measures will be taken. The room erupted in murmurs. Patricia stood up, shouting that it was unfair, that it was absurd, but her lawyer held her, asking her to calm down. Marina covered her face with her hands and cried. She cried from relief, from exhaustion, from gratitude. She felt a hand on her shoulder and turned. It was Robert. He pulled her into a hug right there in front of everyone, and in that embrace, Marina felt that something had changed between them. It was no longer just gratitude. It was something deeper, truer. The days that followed were about adaptation. Michael officially began living only with his father. Visits with Patricia were cold, tense, always with a supervisor present. And gradually these visits became more spaced out, until Patricia simply stopped showing up. Her wounded pride was greater than her maternal love. Marina, in turn, became a fundamental part of Michael's routine. She woke him up in the morning, prepared his breakfast, took him to school, picked him up, helped with homework. And the boy, little by little, began to open up. He started smiling again, playing, being a child again. It was on a June afternoon, 3 months after the hearing, that it happened. Michael was drawing at the kitchen table, while Marina prepared dinner. Suddenly, without looking up from his paper, he said, "Aunt Marina?" "Yes, sweetheart?" "Can I call you Mum?" Marina froze, the knife still in her hand, the potatoes half cut. She turned slowly to the boy. He looked at her with those big, hopeful eyes, afraid of rejection. "Michael, The words caught in her throat. "You have a biological mother." "I know," the boy said, "but she was never a real mum. She never hugged me when I had nightmares. Never read me a story to sleep. Never called when I was sad. You do that. Every day. So can't you be my mum?" Marina knelt in front of him, her eyes full of tears. "I would be honored," she whispered. "It would be the greatest honor of my life to be your mum." Michael smiled. A huge, genuine smile full of love, and he threw himself into her arms. That's how Robert found them when he came home from work. Marina hugging Michael, both crying and laughing at the same time. When she told him what had happened, Robert knelt down too, and the three of them stayed there, embracing on the kitchen floor, forming something none of them had had in a long time, a real family. The months that followed were filled with healing, rebuilding, and learning to be a family. Marina was no longer just the cleaner who arrived in the morning and left at night. She was part of that home, part of that routine, part of that life. Robert had insisted that she move into one of the mansion's bedrooms, claiming it would be easier to take care of Michael, especially when he had nightmares. Marina resisted at first, worried about what people would think, about the boundaries that might become blurred. But the truth was that Michael needed her close, and she, if she were honest with herself, didn't want to be far away. Mrs. Nora and Jessica also benefited. Robert had arranged a better apartment for them in Kensington, near a good public school where Jessica got a scholarship. The girl was radiant, finally able to focus on her studies without worrying about having to work. "You changed our lives, sis," Jessica had said during one of Marina's visits. "Because of your courage, I'll be able to go to university. We're going to have a better life." But not everything was rosy. Patricia continued to be a threatening shadow. She no longer showed up for supervised visits, but she was always doing something behind the scenes. She tried to appeal the judge's decision, but it was denied. She tried to sue Robert for parental alienation, but had no evidence. She tried to discredit Marina on social media, creating fake profiles to spread lies, but Richard managed to track and sue her for defamation. Gradually, Patricia lost everything. Her social circle, which once adored her, began to distance themselves when the truth about the mistreatment came to light. Her own mother, a prominent London socialite, was so ashamed that she cut ties with her daughter. And the Crown Prosecutor boyfriend, Dr. Edward, ended the relationship when he realized that being associated with her was harming his career. Susan, in turn, faced legal consequences. She was convicted of assault and mistreatment, received a 2-year sentence under a semi-open regime, and was legally prohibited from working with children. Her name was included in registers that prevented any employment in schools, nurseries, or family homes. She was finally paying for years of violence disguised as discipline. Meanwhile, in the Belgravia mansion, life flourished. Michael was unrecognizable. The quiet, frightened boy had been replaced by a vibrant, energetic child who ran through the corridors, laughed loudly, and asked questions about everything. Sessions with Dr. Helen continued, but now they were more spaced out. The trauma was being processed, healed, and between Marina and Robert something delicate and beautiful was growing. At first, neither of them knew how to handle it. There were glances that lasted a second too long, accidental touches that left the skin tingling, conversations that stretched into the early hours after Michael went to sleep. Robert was afraid of confusing gratitude with love, afraid of taking advantage of a vulnerable situation, afraid of spoiling the family they had built. Marina had her own fears, fear of not being good enough, of being seen as an opportunist, of Michael thinking she was trying to replace his biological mother. It was Mrs. Nora, in her simple wisdom, who gave the final push. "Daughter, love doesn't ask about social class. It doesn't ask about origin. It doesn't ask about anything. Love just is. And if you love that man, and if he loves you, who are you to waste that because of what others will think?" Marina was at her mother's house on a Sunday afternoon. Michael had gone with Robert to buy swimming gear for the lessons he would start the following week. She had taken the opportunity to visit her family. "I don't know if he loves me, Mum," Marina said, stirring the coffee that was getting cold in her cup. "Maybe he's just grateful." "For heaven's sake, Marina," Jessica interjected, rolling her eyes. "The man looks at you like you're the eighth wonder of the world. He smiles when you enter the room. He asks your opinion on everything. And you think that's just gratitude." Marina laughed, but deep in her heart she knew. She knew from the kisses that almost happened and were interrupted. She knew from the hands that touched and lingered. She knew from the way her heart raced when she heard his car arriving home. The resolution came on an August evening in the mansion's garden. Michael was asleep. The stars shone in the clear London sky, and Marina was watering the flowers she had planted the previous month. Robert came up behind her silently. "You've transformed this house," he said, and he wasn't just talking about the flowers. Marina turned, surprised. He was barefoot, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his hair slightly disheveled. He looked younger like that, lighter, more himself. "Robert, Let me speak first," he interrupted, taking a step forward. "I've spent the last few months trying to understand what I feel, trying to separate gratitude from something else. But the truth is, I can't pretend anymore. It's not gratitude, Marina. It's love. I've fallen in love with you. For your courage, for your kindness, for the way you care for my son as if he were your own, for the way you make me want to be a better man." Marina felt tears well up. "Robert, I'm not from your world. I don't know how to be a businessman's wife, how to behave at fancy dinners, I don't want you to be anything other than what you already are," Robert said. And now he was so close she could feel his warmth. "I don't want a businessman's wife. I want you, the woman who screams when she sees injustice, the woman who puts a child's safety above her own, the woman who transformed a cold house into a home full of love." And then he kissed her. It was a soft, careful kiss full of promises. And when they pulled apart, both were crying and smiling at the same time. "I love you too," Marina whispered. "I love you so much, I'm afraid." "Then let's be afraid together," Robert said. "But let's be happy too." They didn't tell Michael immediately. They wanted to be sure he was ready, that he wouldn't feel confused or betrayed. But children are more perceptive than adults imagine. A week later, during breakfast, Michael looked at them both and said, "Are you two dating?" Marina almost choked on her juice. Robert coughed. Michael just smiled, that mischievous smile that was appearing more and more. "It's just that you keep looking at each other and smiling. And yesterday I saw you holding hands in the garden. How do you feel about that?" Marina asked, her heart pounding. Michael thought for a moment, very serious for his 5 years. "I think it's good," he finally said. "Then you can get married and you can be my real mum, with papers and everything." And so, with the blessing of a 5-year-old child, Robert decided to act. The proposal happened on an ordinary November day. There was no fancy restaurant or big production. It was in the garden at dusk, with Michael hidden behind the kitchen door trying to peek. Robert knelt, took a small box from his pocket and said, "Marina Adams, you have changed my life and my son's life in ways I will never be able to fully thank you for. You gave us love when we were lost. You gave us a home when we were adrift. You gave us hope when everything seemed dark. I don't have much to offer beyond what you already see here. An imperfect man, a child who needs a lot of love and a life that will never be conventional. But I promise to love you every day, to respect you always, and to build with you the family we always dreamed of. Will you marry me?" Marina couldn't even answer with words. She just nodded, crying, as Robert placed the ring on her finger. It was a simple ring, white gold with a small diamond, but for Marina it was worth more than all the treasures in the world. Michael ran out of the kitchen screaming, "Yai!" and threw himself into their arms. The three of them stayed there embracing, forming a circle of love and security. The wedding was scheduled for March of the following year in a simple ceremony in the mansion's garden itself. Marina didn't want anything too big, and Robert respected that. Only the closest people were invited: Mrs. Nora, Jessica, some of Marina's cousins, a few of Robert's friends, Richard, the lawyer who had become a friend, and Dr. Helen, who had been instrumental in Michael's recovery. Patricia was not invited. She didn't even know about the wedding, and it was better that way. The last news they had of her was that she had moved to Edinburgh, trying to restart away from the scandal her life in London had become. On the wedding day, Marina woke up in the guest room where she slept when she needed privacy. Mrs. Nora and Jessica were there, helping her get ready. The dress was simple, white made of light cotton, with embroidered flowers on the hem. She wore her hair loose with just a small white flower pinned to the side. "You look beautiful, daughter," Mrs. Nora said, her eyes shining. "Your father would be so proud." Marina remembered her father, who passed away when she was 10, a good, hard-working man who always told her that a person's worth was not in what they had, but in what they did for others. He would be happy, she was sure. The ceremony was in the late afternoon, with the golden sun creating a perfect light. Chairs had been placed in the garden, decorated with simple but beautiful flowers. The justice of the peace was the same Judge Albright who had presided over the custody case. When Robert invited him, he accepted, saying it would be an honor to celebrate the marriage of two people who showed the true meaning of family. Marina entered through the garden, led by Michael. He had insisted on being the one to walk her down the aisle, wearing a navy blue suit that made him look like a little man. He held the rings on a small white cushion and had the proudest smile in the world. When Marina got close to Robert, he was crying. He didn't even care to hide it. She was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, not because of the dress or the hairstyle, but because of the light that emanated from her, the genuine happiness in her eyes. The vows were simple and true. Robert promised to love her, respect her, and protect her every day of his life. Marina promised to walk beside him, in good times and bad, building together a home full of love and truth. When the judge said, "You may kiss the bride," Michael shouted, "Finally!" making everyone laugh. And when Robert's lips touched Marina's, sealing that union, there was no wealth, no social class, no judgments. There was only love. The reception was in the garden itself, with a barbecue, simple music, children running around. There was no pomp or glamour, but there was life, there was joy, there was truth. Mrs. Nora danced even with her arthritis, leaning on Jessica. Richard gave an emotional speech about courage and justice. Dr. Helen congratulated Marina, saying she was proof that love heals more than any therapy. And Michael, little Michael, who had started it all with his muffled cry of pain, now laughed loudly, played with the cousins Marina had brought from Brixton, and every now and then ran to his mother for a hug. "Mum," he said now, without hesitation, without fear. And every time he spoke that word, Marina's heart filled with a happiness she didn't even know was possible to feel. When night fell and the guests left, the three of them stayed in the garden, lying on a blanket looking at the stars. Michael was already sleepy, his head resting on Marina's shoulder. "Thank you," Robert said softly, "for saving us." "I didn't save anyone," Marina replied. "We saved each other," and it was true. She had taken the first step, had the courage to scream, to interfere, to risk everything. But after that, it had been a collective journey. Robert learning to be a present father. Michael learning to trust again. Marina learning that her worth was not in what others thought of her, but in what she knew to be true. Months later, life in the Belgravia mansion was unrecognizable. Where there was once silence, there was now music. Where there was once coldness, there were now hugs. Where there was once loneliness, there was now family. Susan served her sentence, reflecting on the choices she had made. Patricia lived her life in Edinburgh, isolated, still bitter, still unable to accept that she had lost, due to her own coldness. But they no longer mattered. They were just shadows of the past, scars that had healed. Michael was 7 now, active, intelligent, affectionate. He was doing well in school, had friends, swam. Every now and then he still had a nightmare, a difficult day, but he knew he had somewhere to run. He had a father who listened to him. He had a mother who embraced him. Marina never forgot where she came from. Every month she returned to Brixton, not only to visit Mrs. Nora and Jessica, but to help other women in the community. She created a project, financed by Robert, that offered vocational training and legal support to domestic cleaners. She knew she had been lucky, that she had found a good man. But she also knew that many other women were not as lucky. And if she could help them, she would. "You never changed," Robert said one night, watching her review the project papers at the kitchen table. "Even with everything that happened, you're still the same woman who screamed to defend a child you barely knew." "And you haven't changed either," Marina replied, smiling. "You're still the man who had the courage to admit his mistakes and fight for what's right." They kissed there in the kitchen, as they did so many times. Simple, everyday kisses, but full of love. And so life went on with its ups and downs, its joys and challenges, but always together, always united, always being the family they chose to be. Because in the end, it's not blood that makes a family. It's love. It's the daily choice to be present, to care, to protect. It's the courage to scream when something is wrong, even when the whole world asks for silence. It had all started with a scream that echoed beyond the walls of a mansion, beyond social differences, beyond what seemed possible. A scream that saved not just a child, but 3 lost souls who found in each other the way back home.